With Russia's war heading towards its 5th month and Ukraine's ports still shut, consumers around the world are seeing prices rocket for essentials from bread to vegetable oil. Not only that, much of the most intense fighting is now focused on Ukraine's agricultural heartlands in the south and east. DW's Nick Connolly visited a farmer on the front lines near Mykolaiv.
Birdsong and tractors are not the only sounds on Nadia Ivanova's 4,000 hectares. Artillery fire in the distance never really stops, but Nadia and her team are preoccupied with other things.
Look at this wheat. It's underfed. It's underloved.
But that wasn't for want of trying on Nadia's part. For most of the crucial early growing season, she couldn't even get to her fields. They were a war zone. The fighting is now at least 25 kilometers away. Far enough for Nadia and her team to get back to feeding the world.
The missiles fly over our heads towards Mykolaiv over there. Wheat in the fields catches fire really easily with all the dry straw. If you do get a direct hit, you can lose hectares to the flames in a matter of minutes.
This unexploded Russian missile had dug its way a metre into the ground. Just some of the ordnance that the Russians left behind them, alongside landmines and countless shells. They also took a lot with them, from chainsaws to food and even cutlery. Nadia is still totting up the losses. This crop sprayer was the farm's pride and joy. It had just been bought for more than €250,000. It was destroyed before it could even be used.
They used cassette bombs. It turns the insides of equipment like this to mince. It's a mess. See that spray tank riddled with holes?
With months of fieldwork missed and much of her machinery either destroyed or short of diesel, Nadia says this year's harvest will be modest at best. Unlike the harvest stuck behind these walls, 2021 was a record year across southern Ukraine, with full grain storage units almost everywhere. Much of the bumper crop hadn't even reached world markets when war broke out in late February. That's because many farmers keep their grain back until prices are highest during the winter months. In Nadia's case, that's thousands of tons. And the first of this year's harvests, barley, is just 10 days away. Most farmers here will barely have anywhere to put it.
Grain used to be like gold. You could always sell it easily whenever you wanted. This is the first time ever we can't get it off our hands.
With Ukraine's ports not only shut, but also mined, and a deal with Russia to reopen them not on the cards, alternatives from river barges to rail freight are desperately being sought. But none of them come close to even matching the capacity and price of transport by sea. Even when new routes have been found, trucks now face weeks-long tailbacks to unload. For now, the grain from this farm and thousands like it is going nowhere. It's a situation that's left Nadia struggling to pay her workers' wages at the same time as the world desperately waits for the grains she produces. But at least she's still producing it all. And when the ports eventually do reopen, there'll be a crop to sell, in spite of mines in the soil and shells overhead.
Nick, over 20 million tons of grain, I understand, are stuck in Ukraine because of the war. This is fueling fears of a global food crisis. What efforts are being made to unblock exports of that much-needed grain?
Well, exactly, and those 20 million are just from last year's harvest, and as we heard there, the next harvest is just a couple of weeks away, so those sums, those figures could go up very fast. There's talk of using the railways, of sending trucks and trying to make the customs processing easier to send those through the borders much quicker. But if you look at the sums, they are just incomparable to basically what has been happening in the past via the ports. The capacity just is a factor of 10 in some cases less, and it's obviously a lot more expensive. So yes, some grain is getting through, but not on a scale that's really going to put prices down and enable people who consume this Ukrainian grain, Ukrainian sunflower seed oil around the world, basically from West Africa to Asia and most of Europe. Those prices are not going to go anywhere in a hurry until Ukraine's ports are reopened and until Russia basically ends this war, because as it is now, Ukraine has no trust that if it opens its ports, if it takes those mines away, the Russians won't take advantage of that and won't use that to invade cities like Mykolaiv and Odessa. So for now, I think people around the world are going to have to wait for this Ukrainian food, because it's basically not going anywhere, even though there are attempts to try and get it out, at least in some quantities.
Nick, thanks so much for your reporting. DW's Nick Connolly there in central Ukraine. Lebanon is just one of the countries to feel the effects of those Ukrainian wheat shortfalls. Supply shortages in the Mediterranean country mean flour is now harder to come by. The problem has only added to the woes in Lebanon, which is already facing a severe political and economic crisis.
Queues for bread start early, like at this bakery in the southern part of Lebanon's capital, Beirut. Its baker, Mohammed, has hardly anything left to sell. Bread is becoming scarce in Lebanon. The bakers are running out of flour. We used almost all the flour we had today for baking. So after 2 hours, there's no more bread, not here nor in the other branches. There's no bread in the supermarket either. There is a shortage of flour. Supplies are also running low at wholesalers. Previously, around 25 tons were sold every day here, but now wholesaler Rabia can only deliver up to 1 ton each day, and supplies will soon run out. A large part of Lebanon's wheat came from Ukraine and Russia, as did sunflower oil. Now, new suppliers are urgently needed. The government has to secure loans and find alternatives to Ukrainian wheat. And we need storage. Another problem is that we lost our wheat silos in the explosion that happened at the port of Beirut. There is no longer a place to store wheat. The devastating explosion in Beirut's port almost 2 years ago not only destroyed the wheat silos, but people's confidence in politics here. The country is experiencing an economic crisis. The currency is in free fall. Food prices have risen by more than 600%. Bread prices have also multiplied. The World Bank has promised Lebanon a $1 million loan for wheat, but the money hasn't arrived yet.
We are having a very serious concern that if the Russia-Ukraine crisis continues to grow, and we import about 80% of our wheat from Russia and Ukraine, we don't have any national reserves in Lebanon.
The last bread of the day is coming out of the ovens, overseen by the baker Mohammed. He doesn't know if he'll have flour again tomorrow. Even though Russia has supposedly promised to release wheat deliveries, there is still no sign of them in Lebanon. We demand a solution for this country. We're fed up. People are emigrating because it's no longer possible to live here. There's not even bread.
I baked something with potatoes and a little bit of flour. Now we are creators, you know.
The people of Lebanon fear that very soon there will simply be no more bread.